be in order for them to make informed decisions about land use options. And it may be that they choose alternative land use options that better support their livelihoods. Good governance with transparency and enabling policy environments, rights in tenure, and this one is critical, as unless there is secure tenure and rights, it will be very difficult to both protect the sustainable management of ecosystems as well as local communities. Now, stakeholder engagement. There's a number of different safeguard systems, those coming from UN RED, those from the World Bank, and almost all of them presume that consultation will be an important part, and that if you establish the consultation mechanisms, that the local communities, the desired stakeholders will come and will agree to being consulted. My question is, what if they don't? Then what? Does the project or the policy process continue without their consent? If stakeholders withhold participation in the consultation process, which should be their right, what are the implications of that? And as I have been witness to over the last several weeks in the case of Thailand, if a strong civil society exists, there may be deep resentment to being seen as rubber stamping policy developments. This is a headline from last night. This was a little bit more on the evolving situation around Thailand's RED Readiness Preparation Plan, where one of the major NGOs, NGO coalitions, has basically rejected the process due to the way the consultations were designed, in which they've felt that it has been predetermined, the results and the actual process were not open for discussion. And the backlash of this has been significant. The lesson: we cannot presume the various stakeholders are passive partners in the development or the implementation of activities. What is required is their real and their full consultation, and the reality that this comes with the risk that maybe the activity does not go ahead. And this final point is my own reflections, drawing on some of Rikoff's work linking adaptation mitigation in the context of community forestry, and the potential role for an adaptation lens or a focus on adaptive capacity as both a safeguard as well as a co-benefit. Already we're seeing one of the RED voluntary standards, the CCBA, the Climate Community Biodiversity Alliance standard, including adaptation benefits as one of the criteria for gold status of RED projects. And I would argue that if we utilize a framework such as a sustainable livelihoods approach with its underpinnings of the 5 livelihood assets: physical, natural, social, financial, and human, that there is potential for RED activities to enhance, or at a minimum, to do no harm to basic livelihood assets. If we use this approach and this framework for adaptation in the context of RED projects, I think that there is some potential not only to protect communities as well as to secure their buy-in, because there's clear incentives for them to do so. So the lesson from this, for me at least, is that there are no easy one-size-fits-all solutions, and the safeguards bring with them a risk of being unwieldy and bureaucratic. However, I think we need to consider that adaptive capacity might not only be a safeguard in protecting vulnerable communities, but in fact it might be essential to allowing RED to work. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. For those who are not familiar with RED, R-E-D-D, it is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Okay. All right. Gareth, we move on to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to start by thanking the Korean government for hosting and their leadership. 안녕하세요. Ebun Pureme, Chu Chaehe Chu Shin Hango Chong Buege. Kamsahamnida. Thank you. I'd also thank Marco Silvestri for his hard work and his team in creating this conference. This is currently one of many conferences globally that we're able to attend, but it's quickly becoming a firm favorite, certainly for the Australian delegations. Part of that is we feel quite secure in a big, cozy, safe family. And I'm genuine about that. We're quite a small global community. So it's important that we learn and share from each other. And these experiences here help carry us through the year. Don't think that corporate adaptation work is any easier than the work that you do. It's a narrow, dangerous path and often very lonely at times. So there's a social benefit in coming here. I was reminded by Bernadette's opinion on othering. It's very easy just to think of people as other. And I'm really reminded by the mayor's passionate speech connected to me. The mayor said to me at the dinner that I looked European, but I'm clearly Asian. So I was very pleased with that duality. You can tell by my accent that I wasn't born in Australia. I was born in Ireland and raised during 30 years of conflict. That conflict saw death and a lot of violence in my family. We were a high-profile textile family, employed nearly 4,000 people. Our own survivability, or our thrivability, was based on my family's, think of them like a mini chaebol, the family's ability to build bridges and engage across diversity and difference. So our own critical path and the path and environment that shaped me is to engage with those on the outside, those with no voices, or those that choose not to engage. And that requires a mixture of stealth and being quite tactical. I'm going to cover very briefly some core issues because I hear a desire from the development community to also build bridges. And I'm just really going to cover 3 very quick points: why, who, and how. And you'll hear more detail in 5.1 from some colleagues in our alliance that have come up from Australia that are working across the region. So panel 5.1, you'll find a lot more detail. Thank you. So part of the reason why, and I've started with finance because it's clearly what a lot of development community think of first. This graph, courtesy of Salim Haq's latest paper, clearly shows the capital flow. On the left-hand side of the screen, the gold-colored represents the private capital flows, which are some 60% of total financing for climate change. I would guess that the majority of those funds are actually private flows for mitigation work. But if you move to the right-hand side of the diagram, you'll see that adaptation accounts for only 4% of capital flows. So that's very significant. It explains part of the reason that when most people think of climate, they think of carbon. And I sometimes think of some of the green carbon monsters as part of the problem as well. So we're trying to look at an integrated view and not just simply think of carbon. So I'm asking you to think of the corporate sector as more than just funding. Most of the infrastructure that you benefit from, whether that's highways, railways, bridges, schools, hospitals, financial services, food supply chains, all are delivered by the private sector. So there's clear efficiencies of scale, and I'm meeting a large Hong Kong conglomerate tomorrow that operates 15,000 sites across 80 countries. So they have enough reach to affect change, policy, and political landscapes. So they're a critical party to work with. The political influence and reach can work against some of the things that we're trying to do. So it's important that you understand the political power and lobbying power of some of these organizations. And I'm talking about Sogashosha, I'm talking about Chaebol, I'm talking about transnational corporations. So transnational corporations are those that operate across domain, but generally have a headquarters with authority given to the in-country. Think of Coca-Cola, rather than maybe in a multinational. They've got some of the best analytical and logistics capabilities. I was recently talking to a Japanese company which is planning a 2100 climate horizon, and they have 50 climate adaptation specialists based in Tokyo with downscaling to individual sites. So that's more significant than the entire Australian government capability. So the private sector are across these issues and working on them. And because it's a strategic issue, they're not going to tell you about it. We've got educated, highly motivated people working for corporates, and it's not always the easiest environment to work in. So their motivations aren't always shared with other people in society. I'm suggesting here they're powerful allies or difficult enemies, and many of you obviously come across a number of barriers where the power structures are clearly work against you. And they can be both competitive and collaborative. So we try and work with sectors, the property sector, financial services sector, fund managers. They often need a high trust environment, a shared non-attribution environment. I want you to think of who is as important. Remember that companies, the word company comes from Latin meaning companus, meaning to break bread. It means sitting around a table and sharing some personal time and moments with your colleagues. So I'm using the image here of the Gherkin in London with a senior executive looking out at the weather or the climate variability and struggling with his strategic choice. I've suggested who is large TNCs and multinationals, and I'm also going to focus on skin in the game companies. If any of you have read Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragility, he makes a point of skin in the game. And we find that as well. The companies that get it and act on it, and the individuals that get it and act on it, have either experience of extreme weather conditions, a long-term interest, a reward in the company, so KPIs, or they own the companies. And we find a real difference between privately held large global companies and those listed. And there's plenty of work to be done in changing the governance rules. And we've had a number of discussions with Swiss and US authorities around changing governance rules to require climate impact disclosure as part of corporate reporting. Those with long-term vision, and again, privately held companies are critical. I'm doing some work with one of the world's largest property companies, which is privately held, operates in 33 companies. It's close to 500 years old. They have a 200-year planning horizon, which allows them to accommodate variability, climate change, political risk, uncertainty, technology, and so on. And I want briefly to talk about how, because a lot of you clearly can benefit from building bridges and relationships with corporates, both in your own markets, but also internationally. One of the things I did in the past was set up a closed organization, high trust network for CEOs. 200 CEOs in Australia, 50 in New Zealand, and both prime ministers. Now that was a closed, what you might almost call a boys' club, but it's a high trust network that allowed information sharing between parties, and again, Chatham House rules. So non-disclosure, non-attribution. Now, I know NGOs and other communities are very wary of closed-door discussions and power meetings and so on. But we use this technique in our engagement because it creates that safety. And we need vulnerability. We need people to feel safe to be vulnerable, to actually open up. When you're engaging corporates, focus on co-benefits and mutual gains. A lot of what we can achieve can be done through good policy. and that policy can be shaped by corporates that get it, rather than opposed by those who you haven't engaged. Focus on co-benefits in terms of also financial. You need to talk the same language as the corporates. You need to understand their strategy, their exposure and vulnerabilities. Start with strategic thinkers in power. This is not a green issue, it's not a CSR issue. And I suggest you'll fail if you try and engage with the carbon community on climate. They're different. In our experience with 200 executives in Australia, the carbon community is not having enough agency or authority to affect change at the board level. They tend to be very passionate and like we are, but often that passion sends the wrong message to generally male-heavy boards. Language is critical, and we heard from the panel today about the importance of language. We need to get away from catastrophic doom thinking or language. Those mental frames, and recognizing the challenge that we've got, but those mental frames actually constrain opportunity thinking. We need to have a clear understanding of risk and opportunity. We need to present as many opportunities as in fact, I'd argue we present more opportunities than risk. Some of our clients, we can't talk openly about climate change, so we talked about supply chain vulnerability or risk management as an entry point. Public disclosures are critical. Again, very few companies like to find their name in the media or having a campaign against them, or the reputation of their brand or their staff. So it's important, again, that you take that slow and steady, low-key, high-trust approach. And then there's the implementation phase. So this is my colleague, Donovan Burton from Climate Planning, and myself last year. We worked with the Baluchistan Small to Medium Development Agency. The Baluchis were some of the most adaptable people we've ever met. And the contrast between sitting in a boardroom in Australia and being on the streets of Baluchistan couldn't be greater. And yet I have to say, these people were more effective and more capable than most corporates, based on no resource, constrained governance systems, and very strained environment. We take a co-development approach rather than a technical consulting approach. We find that the client or counterpart understands their business better than any consultant ever will. So our approach is actually to work with them through their issue and through their frames, and introduce climate in a temporal and spatial context that they understand. You will never get anywhere with most listed companies with 2100 or 2050 climate forecasts when the CEO is paid on 90-day returns or is motivated by stock options running, as I said the other day, on 3 nanosecond trades. So 3 nanosecond trades are never going to incorporate sustainability, resilience, anti-fragility, some of the places that we're trying to go. So you have to use a different method for approaching. As I say, we're about to present at 5.1. We're open for business. We're launching Climate in the Boardroom Asia, and we're interested in collaboration and cooperation with different parties. We welcome the learning experience that you guys can teach us, and we hope we can involve the corporate sector and deliver benefits for all. Thank you.
We have our final speaker who has just joined us. Dr. Ratana Po van den Hovel is professor at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, and visiting researcher at the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies. She has been a consultant for the regional scenarios CGI RCRP 7 on climate change, agriculture, and food securities. And she is on the advisory board of the Asia-Pacific Migration Environment Network and has served as a consultant for a number of development organizations. She holds a PhD in political science, majoring in philosophy, and a minor in Arabic and a master's degree in political science and philosophy. Ratana?
Good morning. Well, sorry, I actually arrived really late, and I'm extremely sorry for that. We are maybe a few participants to be 20 kilometers away from here. I guess what I wanted to point out when we have been requested to talk about neglected group was basically to think kind of outside the box. And I guess not only because I'm French and that right now in Bangladesh there is full of hartal, I'm going to do that well this morning because I'm still missing my coffee. But let's just start it. Good thing. If I know again how to use it. Perfect. So critical and neglected group. Well, I guess after 3 amazing speakers, and some that I know very well already, I'm just going to ask you, do critical and neglected group remain non-identified? I hope not, after almost 1 hour. I guess you have a better idea, right? I see some head going here and there. No? I guess you know some of them, I hope. We usually say, okay, neglected group are the classical one.